architecture, specifically the international style. The main idea with a modernist design is that form should serve a function. So you can see this building is very plainly designed. Lots of straight lines, flat surfaces, not much in the way of ornamentation or decoration. Most of the office buildings of the last 50 years or so are done in either the modernist or postmodernist styles. And you can see an example of postmodernist architecture just past the left edge, that Chase building, the one with the tinted windows and the green roof. That is the Faison building. It was completed in 1989, and the main idea with postmodernist architecture is that the modernist buildings look a little boring. So on these postmodernist structures, you get a lot of those little details that the modernist buildings will lack. Especially up at the top there, you see the peaks and spires and globes. None of that with any functional purpose, but just meant to enhance the building's look. You can see a more classical type of architecture if you look off the starboard side again, right down Michigan Street as we pass beneath the bridge. You can see that building with the blue mansard roof. That is the Mitchell building, completed in 1876. Down to the Second Empire style of architecture, very ornate design of that building. Off of the port side now, looking left as you're facing forward, you can see that building with the tall stone pillars. That's the old Gimbel's department store building. Completed in 1901, designed by the architect Daniel Burnham. This is done in the neoclassical style, and for many decades was home to Milwaukee's downtown Gimbel's. Gimbel's closed this location in 1986. Today it is a mixed-use facility with office, hotel, and retail space. Back to the starboard side, through the plaza of the Chase building, you can see the Iron Block building just across the street. It's one of the oldest office buildings in the city. It was built back in 1860. And the facings of that building, it looks like brick or carved stone. Those are actually molded plates of cast iron that were made in New York and then shipped here to Milwaukee to be assembled on the iron block. I mentioned Daniel Burnham a few moments ago. He was one of the best-known architects of his generation. Designed the Flatiron Building in New York City, the famous White City of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and was one of the pioneers of the modern skyscraper design. And the First National Bank building here off the starboard side is another work of his. This was completed in 1914. Considered to be Milwaukee's first skyscraper. It stands 16 stories tall, done in the Chicago School. So we'll get a look at Milwaukee's City Hall clock tower in just a moment. It's going to be, again, off the starboard side, just above these trees here along the river walk. And the City Hall clock tower now coming into view. City Hall was built in 1895 and was at that time one of the tallest inhabitable buildings on the planet. Standing 350 feet tall. City Hall remained the tallest building in Wisconsin until 1972. And it's still to this day one of the largest masonry structures in the U.S., made up of about 8 million bricks.
There's the phone.
So as we make the turn around here, if you look ahead of us now, you can see that building with the green domes on its roof. That is the Germania building. Completed in 1896, it is done in the Beaux Arts style of architecture. You can tell that by the flat roof, the arched windows, and the decorative features like those domes up on top, or the very ornate entryway. The Germania was commissioned by a man named George Grunder, who for a long time ran the area's largest publishing company, also later owned the Boston Red Sox. And those domes up on top are called Pickelhaube domes. That's a word that means, a German word that means pointed bonnet. So one more building we're going to take a look at here in downtown, and it's just Up ahead of us, along the starboard side again, that building with the fish artwork on it, is the Empire Building. And it is home to the Riverside Theater, which opened up in 1927 as one of more than a dozen downtown Milwaukee movie theaters. The Riverside is the only one of these old theaters still in use today. No longer showing movies, but now one of the city's premier live music venues. And that area there with the fish on it is the backside of what once was the screen, or is today the stage at the Riverside. So waiting on the Wisconsin Avenue Bridge once more. We are in one of the oldest parts of the city right now, right between two of the original three settlements that came together to incorporate as Milwaukee in 1846. Looking off the port side east of the river, you see what was once known as Juneau Town, named for Solomon Juneau, a French fur trader who arrived in this area in the 18-teens. Then off the starboard side, you can see what was once known as Kilbourne Town, named for Byron Kilbourne. He got here in the 1830s. He was a land speculator. And those two had a pretty intense rivalry from the get-go here. A lot of that rivalry had to do with control over this part of the river. From the earliest days up until the 1920s, most of the cargo traffic that came into Milwaukee docked along this part of the river. From this point northward, behind where we are right now, there were once dozens of different cargo docks. Shipping into Milwaukee peaked in the 19-teens when they were getting about 6,000 cargo vessels in here annually. And by the teens and 20s, all that boat traffic, commercial boat traffic on this part of the river, began to cause a lot of problems with the downtown street traffic. During the peak of the shipping season back then, bridges like the Wisconsin Avenue up ahead of us could see between 50 and 60 bridge openings per day on average. And by that time, the city was looking for ways to divert cargo traffic from this part of the river. And we'll see some evidence of those attempts later on in our tour. Also from this point, looking at the bridge, you can see evidence of that rivalry between Juneau and Kilbourne I mentioned a couple moments ago. Again, those two did not get along, and when it came time for each of those guys to build his city street grid, neither really paid attention to what was happening on the other side of the river. So as those street grids developed, it turned out that the east-west streets didn't match up as they met the river. So when it finally came time to bridge the river, the city by that time had developed to the point where they could no longer correct those streets, so they had to build the bridges at an angle. And as we pass underneath the Wisconsin Avenue Bridge again here, if you take a look first to your right and then to your left as you're facing forward, you can see what I mean about this misaligned street. It's very noticeable here on Wisconsin Avenue.
In the winter, this will pretty fun. Someone bus goes to work this way. Yeah, cool.
So in addition to all of the cargo traffic that once used this part of the river, there was also once quite a bit of passenger boat traffic. Between the 1860s and the 1930s, as many as a dozen different passenger lines operated on this part of the river. Most of that business by the 1930s ended up being lost to the railroads, but some of these passenger carriers were very, very large. The largest of the boats that docked here on the river could carry about 4,000 passengers and would be over 400 feet long. Actually, the Goodrich Steamship Company, the largest Great Lakes passenger carrier, their Milwaukee Depot was at one time just up ahead of us off the starboard side where the Milwaukee Boat Line dock is today. And in the souvenir photo book on page 8, we've got a great old postcard of the Christopher Columbus. Again, that was the largest of the passenger carriers here. That's one that could carry about 4,000 people. So again, by the 1930s, passenger traffic was pretty much gone from this part of the river. Cargo traffic lingered for 2 decades longer before disappearing in the 50s, which left this part of the river by the 60s as something a lot of people saw and kind of outlived its usefulness. If you look off either side of the boat right now, you see these 2 big parking garages on this prime riverfront real estate. Those are both built in the 1960s. By the 60s, that was really the only thing anyone could imagine building down here. And the river was no longer being used by commercial vessels. No one was yet using it recreationally. It was too polluted. Nobody really wanted to look at it. So really the only thing people could imagine down here was empty lots or parking space. Of course, that's turned around quite a bit now with the river having become a pretty major recreational part of this city, but it was a long comeback for the river to re-emerge as of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the comeback of the river when we come back in off of the lake. So off the starboard side right now, you can see that light-colored brick building just across the street. That is the old Pritzlaff Hardware Factory. The oldest part of that building, built in 1875. Now if you notice the light gold color of that building, that is the natural color of those bricks. Early brick makers in this area found that the mud and clay they took out of the Menominee Valley were very sulfur-rich and produced a peculiar light gold colored brick when baked. This was something they hadn't seen before, but quickly became one of the city's trademark building materials.